Looked at the book of Acts together just due to the holidays and some issues with sickness. Acts chapter 20. We're in Acts chapter 24 today. We last left the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 23 with his arrest, and he had been moved down to the city of Caesarea, and there he would appear before the governor Felix. Acts chapter 24 opens with Ananias and a delegation of the Jews coming with their lawyer, Tertullus, to lay their charges before Felix. And the charges were simply this. In verse 5, we have found this man a real pest and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he goes on to say, we would have tried him, but Lysias, a commander, and the people took him out of our charge. We didn't want to trouble you with this. Felix listened to their charges, but it allowed Paul an opportunity to respond. And Paul responded in a very logical way. He talked about the fact he'd only been in Jerusalem 12 days, and he had no real discussions and stirred up any type of riots. And the fact is, he says, they can't prove their charges. But at the same time, he admits he doesn't in any way shy away from the fact that he is a follower of the way and that he serves the God of their fathers. He says, really, I'm on trial today for the resurrection of the dead. He lays out this disagreement that exists between the Jews and the Sadducees and among other sects of God's people. Felix, it says, who had a more accurate understanding of this way, he says, well, let's wait and let's let Lysias come down and give his 2 cents in this matter before I make a declaration. And what follows after verse 22 is really kind of an insight into the character of Felix. We have both he and his wife Drusilla who come and hear Paul, but at the same time he seems to also be motivated by a level of greed, hoping to get paid by Paul. And at the end of the text in verse 27, we have this statement. It says, but after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So the matter was not resolved, it was only delayed, and Paul's imprisonment was prolonged. Guys, what do you get from this text?
Well, I wanted to notice something in verses 14 and 15. Up to this point, the Jews have been laying all these false accusations against Paul, and Paul defends himself, and pretty easily defends himself, but it's almost like Paul can't help but talk about the gospel. He's in a pretty serious situation here, and he can't help but say in verse 14, but this I confess to you. I'm going to confess something. And he says that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers. Going down into verse 15, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. Paul, regardless of whatever situation he's in, has to talk about Jesus, has to talk about what that means to people. And I just wonder if we're willing to do that as well. We might not be in the circumstance that Paul is in, as serious a circumstance, but certainly we all are, whatever circumstance we're in, we need to be so filled with Jesus that we have to tell people about him.
Yeah. And I want to notice 2 verses. First of all, verse 14, where Paul says, this I confess to you that according to the way. I think that's a fascinating way, no pun intended, to think about Christianity. It's one that I don't typically think of Christianity by that description, the way. I think it just prods us to question, what does the way mean? And I think there are several answers we could give. One would be the way to forgiveness, the way to salvation, the way to live. I mean, everything about Christianity is how do you live, and the way to God. And I'd like to connect that with verse 25, because I think Paul sort of describes what the way is in verse 25. He reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. Everything about Christianity is about how do we find the way to God, and how do we live the way we're supposed to live. The way we're supposed to live is following the way of righteousness, the way of self-control, and the way that leads us to and brings us through the coming judgment. So I'd like to challenge you to think about the way, if you're a Christian, and what that means to you. And if you're not a Christian, then we want to help you find the way to God.
Amen. 2 great applications. Thank you for joining us today as we jump back into the book of Acts. If you've got any thoughts on this great chapter, let us know in the comments below. It's not only comments, but if you have any questions, or if you have just, as Mark meant, an interest in the way and want to learn about Jesus, please let us know. We'd love to help you find him as you try to seek him. Thank you for joining us today. Join us tomorrow as we jump into Acts chapter 25.